Most people aren't ignorant. They're lying to themselves, not loudly, not consciously, quietly. Socrates believed the most dangerous person wasn't the tyrant or the fool, but the man who thinks he knows himself and never questions it. Because self-deception feels like certainty, and certainty feels like truth, but it isn't. If you've ever wondered why intelligent people repeat the same mistakes, why confident people collapse under pressure, why good intentions never change outcomes, this is why. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you won't feel comforted. You'll feel exposed. That was Socrates' goal. The first lie: I know myself. The greatest illusion most people live under is not ignorance. It is self-certainty. They move through life convinced they understand who they are, their values, their motives, their character. They say things like, "That's just who I am," as if repetition turns assumption into truth. Socrates called this arrogance, not because people were evil or stupid, but because they stopped questioning. He noticed something unsettling. The more confident someone was about themselves, the less examined their identity usually was. Most identities are inherited, not discovered. They're absorbed from parents, peers, culture, and trauma, then defended as if they were chosen. Identity is not discovered. It is rehearsed. People repeat patterns long enough that they mistake familiarity for truth. They confuse comfort with accuracy. What they call self-knowledge is usually just habit plus justification. I'm just not disciplined. I'm an anxious person. I'm a good judge of character. None of these are insights. They are conclusions reached without investigation. Socrates never claimed wisdom. He claimed ignorance. That wasn't humility. It was leverage. Because the man who admits he doesn't know can observe himself honestly. He can test his beliefs against reality. He can notice contradictions between what he says and what he does. The man who thinks he knows himself cannot do this. Certainty locks the door. Once you decide, "This is who I am," you stop asking dangerous questions. You stop examining why certain outcomes repeat. You stop noticing where your actions betray your words. Self-certainty feels like confidence. In reality, it is stagnation. This is why Socrates was dangerous. He didn't attack people. He asked them to explain themselves and watched as their certainty collapsed under its own weight. Most people are not living deliberately. They are performing a role they never audited. And the moment self-certainty hardens, the mind becomes defensive instead of curious. That is when growth ends. Comment, "I don't know myself yet," or comment, "Certainty is the lie." If this made you uncomfortable, stay. Iron psyche isn't about reassurance, it's about accuracy. And once self-certainty hardens, something worse happens. Comfort is the enemy of truth. Human beings do not seek truth by default. They seek emotional safety. Socrates understood this long before modern psychology put names to it. He observed that truth is rarely rejected because it is false. It is rejected because it is uncomfortable. Truth threatens status. It threatens self-image. It threatens belonging. So the mind quietly protects itself. People don't say, "I refuse to know the truth." They say things that sound reasonable instead. "I did my best. It wasn't my fault. That's just how the world is." These statements feel balanced, mature, rational, and that is exactly why they are dangerous. They end inquiry. The moment a belief soothes discomfort, the mind stops questioning it. Investigation becomes unnecessary. Responsibility dissolves. The narrative stabilizes, even if it's false. Socrates noticed that people rarely defend ideas that are accurate. They defend ideas that are protective. Accuracy can survive pressure. Protection cannot. This is why he believed that any belief which cannot withstand questioning is not knowledge. It is a shield. Most people do not carry truths. They carry shields. They shield themselves from shame, from regret, from the possibility that they chose wrongly. Comfort replaces clarity. The more comforting a belief feels, the less likely it is to be true. Truth often arrives with friction. It creates tension. It forces reconsideration. That is why people resent those who ask questions. A question doesn't attack their intelligence, it attacks their safety. When Socrates asked someone to explain their certainty, he wasn't humiliating them. He was removing the padding around the belief and watching what remained. Often, nothing. Most people would rather preserve emotional stability than adjust their understanding. They would rather feel right than become accurate. And once comfort becomes the priority, truth becomes optional. This is the quiet trade most people make without noticing. To protect these shields, people learn a second lie: rationalization, the art of sounding honest while avoiding truth. Most people don't lie outright. They do something far more sophisticated. They rationalize. Rationalization is not deception aimed at others. It is deception aimed inward, disguised as logic. People explain why change wasn't possible, why effort was enough, why circumstances mattered more than choices. And because the explanation sounds reasonable, it feels honest. Socrates saw through this instantly. He noticed that logic is often not used to discover truth, but to escape responsibility. A man says, "I would have succeeded, but the timing was wrong." Another says, "I did everything I could with what I had." Another says, "Anyone in my position would have done the same." These statements are not examined. They are presented as if explanation equals absolution. Rationalization works because it mimics reasoning. It uses structure. It uses cause and effect. It uses language that feels mature and thoughtful. But its purpose is not accuracy. Its purpose is relief. Relief from guilt. Relief from regret. Relief from the uncomfortable idea that different choices were possible. Socrates didn't confront people with accusations. He didn't say, "You're lying to yourself." He asked simple questions. What do you mean by that? Could it have been otherwise? How do you know this was the only option? These were not attacks. They were clarifications. And that is what made them dangerous. When rationalizations are questioned, people don't calmly adjust them. They become irritated, defensive, angry, not because Socrates was wrong, but because the mental structure was starting to collapse. Rationalization is not ignorance. It is defense. Ignorance doesn't resist questioning. Defense does. The moment someone reacts emotionally to a logical question, it reveals the truth. The explanation was never meant to be tested. It was meant to protect. And once rationalization fails, once the logic can no longer hold, people don't admit error. They reach for something stronger. And when defenses fail, people turn to identity. Identity as a hiding place. When rationalization starts to crack, most people retreat to something stronger. Identity. I'm a good person. I'm logical. I'm spiritual. I'm realistic. These are not descriptions. They are fortresses. Identity is the final hiding place because it cannot be easily questioned without triggering offense. Challenge a belief and people argue. Challenge an identity and people feel attacked. Socrates understood this mechanism precisely. He saw that people do not use identity to express truth. They use it to end inquiry. Once someone says, "That's just who I am," the conversation is supposed to stop. No examination, no contradiction, no accountability. Identity freezes movement. Socrates never argued with labels. He ignored them completely. He separated what people claimed from how they behaved. A man called himself just, but bent rules when it benefited him. A man called himself rational, but defended emotions with elaborate logic. A man called himself virtuous, but avoided discomfort whenever virtue demanded sacrifice. Socrates didn't say, "You're a hypocrite." He simply observed, and observation is lethal to false identity, because behavior never lies. Tone doesn't lie. Patterns don't lie. Choices don't lie. Identity speaks in words. Reality speaks in actions. Most people cannot tolerate this separation. They need their self-image to remain intact more than they need accuracy. They would rather adjust the story than adjust the behavior. So identity becomes insulation. I'm a good person replaces the question, did I do the right thing? I'm logical replaces the question, am I avoiding responsibility? I'm spiritual replaces the question, am I disciplined? These labels provide emotional safety, and that is the point. Socrates believed most people don't want truth. They want a story that lets them sleep at night without friction. Truth demands change. Stories demand agreement. This is why people react so strongly to questioning. Not because the question is unfair, but because it threatens the structure they live inside. Once identity is exposed as performance rather than substance, there is nowhere left to hide, which is why questioning doesn't feel like curiosity. It feels like an attack. Why people hate being questioned. Most people don't hate lies. They hate instability. And nothing destabilizes a person faster than a well-placed question. Socratic questioning doesn't insult. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't lecture. It simply removes the scaffolding holding a belief in place. That's why it feels aggressive. When someone asks, why do you believe that? What evidence supports this? What would prove you wrong? They aren't adding pressure. They're removing comfort. Most beliefs are not built on truth. They're built on repetition, social agreement, and emotional utility. They work because they've never been tested. A question is a test, and tests are terrifying to people who already suspect they might fail. This is why questioning triggers defensiveness so quickly. Not because the question is unfair, but because it exposes fragility. Socrates understood that questions do not create doubt, they reveal it. If a belief is solid, questioning strengthens it. If a belief is hollow, questioning collapses it. That collapse feels like danger, because beliefs aren't just identities. They are load-bearing structures. They support identity, status, relationships, and self-esteem. When you question a belief, you aren't threatening logic. You're threatening the emotional economy built around it. This is why people react with anger instead of curiosity. Anger is a defense response. It signals that the question landed too close to something real. Notice the pattern. People don't say, let me think. They say, why are you attacking me? They don't say, that's interesting. They say, you're being negative. They don't say, I'm not sure. They say, everyone knows this. These are not answers. They are exits. Socrates used questions because questions bypass ego defenses until the ego panics. At that point, conversation stops, not because truth was reached, but because truth became too expensive. Most people would rather protect a false sense of stability than risk the uncertainty that follows honesty. They defend the lie not because it's convincing, but because they don't know who they would be without it. Socrates warned that avoiding this discomfort leads to something far worse than ignorance. The unexamined life is easy and empty. Ease is seductive because it feels like confirmation. If nothing hurts, nothing must be wrong. Socrates rejected this completely. His most famous warning, the unexamined life is not worth living, was not moral outrage. It was diagnosis. An unexamined life runs smoothly because it runs on autopilot. No friction, no resistance, no confrontation, but also no direction. When beliefs are never questioned, behavior becomes repetitive. The same mistakes appear under different names. The same conflicts resurface with different people. The same disappointments return wearing new disguises. Life feels busy, but nothing changes. This is not peace, it's mechanical motion. Socrates noticed that people confuse comfort with correctness. If a belief feels familiar, it must be true. If a routine feels stable, it must be working. But familiarity only proves repetition, not accuracy. Without examination, people don't choose their values. They inherit them. They don't decide their priorities. They absorb them. They don't build character. They perform it. This is why unexamined confidence is dangerous. Confidence without scrutiny becomes arrogance. Certainty without evidence becomes rigidity. Belief without testing becomes identity armor. And identity armor prevents learning. An unexamined life avoids pain, but also avoids depth. It trades growth for predictability. It trades understanding for comfort. Socrates didn't believe people were evil or stupid. He believed they were untested. When examination is absent, suffering doesn't disappear. It just becomes cyclical. You react instead of choose. You cope instead of correct. You explain instead of change. The tragedy isn't that people suffer, it's that they suffer without learning why. That is the emptiness Socrates warned about. Not poverty, not failure, not chaos, but motion without meaning, experience without insight, life happening to you instead of being shaped by you. Examination introduces friction, and friction reveals structure. It shows where your beliefs crack, where your habits misalign, where your story no longer matches your behavior. That discomfort is not a flaw. It is the signal that life has stopped being automatic, and only then does direction become possible. So, if ease is not truth, what does honesty actually require? The Socratic alternative: brutal self-inquiry. Truth does not begin with answers. It begins when you stop protecting yourself. This was Socrates' real threat. He didn't preach virtues. He didn't give systems to memorize. He offered a method that dismantled comfort from the inside, relentless questioning, inward, not the flattering questions people enjoy asking themselves, not who do I want to be, but what do my actions prove I am, not what feels right, but what survives scrutiny. This is where most people turn away, because self-inquiry is not positive, it is not affirming, it is not kind, it is accurate, and accuracy is disruptive. Socratic inquiry strips away intention and examines evidence. It ignores explanations and studies patterns. It doesn't care what you meant, only what you did. That's why it works. When illusions fall, something uncomfortable happens first. Responsibility returns. Not socially, not morally, internally. Excuses collapse because they no longer protect identity. Victim narratives lose credibility. External blame stops working. And in that moment, power quietly re-enters your hands. This is the paradox most people never face. The same questioning that destroys comfort restores control. As long as you lie to yourself, you remain dependent on circumstances, on moods, on other people's approval. But when you interrogate yourself honestly, something stabilizes. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What pattern did I reinforce?" You stop saying, "That's just how I am," and start seeing where behavior contradicts belief. This is not self-hatred, it is self-clarity. Socrates believed freedom did not come from knowing more facts, but from removing false certainty, because false certainty locks behavior in place, and locked behavior produces predictable outcomes. Brutal self-inquiry breaks the loop. It turns life from reaction into direction. Yes, truth costs comfort, it costs ego, it costs belonging in shallow groups, but it buys something far rarer: agency. You no longer need reassurance. You no longer need excuses. You no longer need to pretend. You act with precision because you see clearly. And clarity is the foundation of power. Comment, "I question myself," or "Truth over comfort." Subscribe if you want clarity instead of reassurance. Iron Psyche isn't about feeling right, it's about being precise.